In today's video, we're talking about muscle-centric movement assessment. So what that means is if we've got a physique-orientated client, their goal is body composition, we need to look at movement and assessing of technique in a different way to what we spoke about in previous videos about assessing movement-centric technique, because the goal is different and that means that the criteria is different. So what we're going to do is unpack those considerations today, give you guys more skills, a greater skill set of assessing movement for clients who have different goals. Now, to be a truly effective personal trainer, it's important to know your muscles, how they move, and what they're capable of, and have a clear understanding of the technique that we've spoken about and of how it's important and why it's important in personal training in other articles and other videos. So we can drop the link if you guys haven't seen that one. It's important to watch that one too. But as a trainer, it's integral to know movement and be privy to muscle-centric assessment, which we spoke about. It's like it involves things like line of force, it involves muscle anatomy, it involves joint actions, it involves the concept of understanding range of tensions. We're going to unpack all of those now. So the first concept is line of force. And what we're talking about here is describing the direction of resistance and force being imposed and exerted on muscles and muscle groups. So it's the physical direction that the muscle is moving against. So if we're, lying flat on a bench and we're pressing, if we drew a line through from the sky all the way down through the upper torso, like over the chest, through the back, through the bench to the ground, and we had these dumbbells, which are imposing the resistance on the muscles. It's like that is the line in which that weight from those dumbbells, that is the line which is what it's targeting and what it's working. It's like we've got the chest, it's being loaded, it's being placed under tension, and it's being asked to produce force to move the weight against the load. And it's like we can draw that directional line to understand that. So it's like if we're not targeting, a specific muscle group, but when we look at the line of force, there's that line's going through that muscle group and it has the capabilities of moving within the joint capacity to do it, we might be targeting something that we shouldn't, and we might need to, reposition the client or maybe cue something differently in order to move that line of tension or that line of force back under the target muscles. Now we're moving over to muscle anatomy and understanding, how the muscles are shaped and where they're attached as well. So these are two really integral points of how we load a muscle and why we would load it, and looking at how that muscle contracts. So starting with that origin and insertion point, it's really important to understand that. And I know there's big words and you have to understand where the muscles attach, and there's lots of muscles and stuff, but do a little bit of homework on understanding just the general area. You don't need to know exactly the names of the attachment points, in the anatomical terminology, but it's you got to have a really good idea of the origin being the fixed point and where that fixed point is for a muscle, and where the insertion point is, which is the moving point, and how that origin and insertion come together, because that's essentially how that muscle shortens and lengthens, and which is what's going to be an integral part of locomoting the skeleton. The next part is understanding muscle shape. We have a skeletal muscle has a different shape and serves a different purpose based off their shape. When we look at it, we've got parallel muscles, which are muscles where the fiber orientation runs, parallel from one end to the other. We've got convergent muscles, which are something like a pec, for example, where one point, spans across a large cross-sectional area and converges into a single point, which gives us an indication that those, because of the fiber orientation, how it runs, in multiple directions, we're going to have to train that muscle if we want to, maximal development of that particular muscle group in a multi-planar, multi-directional fashion as well. Then we've got pennate muscles, which converge into a tendon line across a muscle, and there's different types of ones. We've got unipennate, multipennate, and bipennate, and those shapes of those muscles and understanding that actually gives us an indication of the capabilities of those muscle fibers across a range of motion. They don't typically have to be exposed to large amounts of range of motion because of the muscle shape of them, which means that when we look at movement and assess the things in space, we might go, okay, well, there's not a lot of range of motion here, but because this particular muscle group is shaped this way, it's still actually effective to stimulate that tissue for whatever goal it is that you guys are working towards. And then the last one, which is not a skeletal muscle, which is circular, and it's more towards your organs and those kind of things, or it helps with the other bodily kind of responsibilities, which aren't skeletal based, so we don't need to talk about it. So the next part is understanding joint action. So each locomotion of a skeleton happens through joint actions. So each joint has a capacity for movement, and that movement is dictated by the structure of the joint. So if we look at the shoulder, it's like a shallow ball in a really shallow kind of socket that's got a lot of connective tissue connected to it and surrounding it. which gives us a larger range of motion, which means we're going to be capable to do lots of things, but it's an unstable joint. So we've got to think about that as well. It's like the trade-off is large range of motion in terms of joint capability, but less stability given the structure. Then we've got like the hip has its own range of motion. We can go forwards, backwards, to the side and circular, but in less capacity to something like the shoulder. But it's a very, very stable joint. It's one of the most stable joints that we have, which means that, it can resist force greater and we can do large compound, heavy kind of exercises because of that. Then you've got other joints that serve different purposes that do very limited things like, our elbows and our knees, and our ankle joints and things like that. They flex and extend, the ankle kind of everts and inverts. So understanding the joint structure gives us an understanding of its capacity. Understanding the joint actions gives us an understanding of how to assess movement and even how to prescribe exercise and look and see if we're moving within the capabilities of a particular person. Now, every single person is going to have different joint capacity and joint range of motion, and that can be from, strength levels or levels of strength. It can be because of injuries and static postures spent over time. So we need to understand the joint actions of a joint capacity of a joint, but then also of the individual as well. And do they meet the demands of the exercise? And if they don't, can we manipulate the position or manipulate the exercise to suit the client? Or do we need some direct intervention to get that client's range of motion and capacity increased to fit the criteria of that exercise? The range of tension is the amount of tension placed on a muscle as it moves. So we know that all muscles have a contractile range of motion, but the range of tension is when we do an exercise, it's like of that range of motion, that capacity that muscle has to lengthen and shorten. It's like how much of that is under tension in a particular exercise, how much force is being placed on it in that lengthened, mid and shortened position through that exercise. We need to understand that. It's like if we're doing a particular exercise, we need to know okay, so this is more working this particular part of the muscle. So when we're assessing technique, we need to make sure that this particular client is moving through that range of motion, or understanding that we might need to change the position of the client, get that line of force to move or work more of that particular part of the muscle essentially, rather than just looking at the capabilities of the muscle, because there's movements where if we do go to full ROM for a muscle, for example, we're not going to be loading that muscle in a particular range of motion. Like if we're doing side raises, dumbbell side raises, and we're taking the arm all the way down to the side, it's like the range of tension is actually from, about 3 to 4 inches outside of the midline up until this kind of horizontal position here. Taking the dumbbells all the way down to the side of the body actually decreases the range of tension and decreases the work capacity on the muscle for the sets, kind of getting a little bit of a break. So understanding this stuff just gives us the ability to make our clients work harder, make your workouts more effective, and make the intention of the exercise more specific. So they're the 4 key factors to assessing muscle-centric movement. So like we said before, this is probably more skewed towards physique-orientated outcomes, clients invested in body composition. But now you have a 4-tier system to work with in real space to make sure that that client's got the appropriate line of force. It's working to the muscle anatomy and the reference lines of that particular muscle. We have the capacity to assess the joint actions, and we know exactly what that capacity is. And if that client doesn't meet that capacity, we may need to have specific interventions to improve that. And then we also know that there's a range of tension within an exercise that a muscle has the capacity to move within, and we don't get caught up in that more range of motion, better outcomes scenario, because if the target muscle isn't loaded within a particular range of an exercise, there's really no desire to go there depending on the specifics of your program. So if you guys want to know a little bit more about this stuff, again, you can make your way to the website at STCfitLearning.com. Make your way to articles. There's a lot of content there that unpacks all of these kind of technical things in a little bit more of a broad spectrum situation, because we've got, more written content and whatnot. If you guys are nerds and want to learn a little bit more, head to the podcast. We unpack lots of things. We do an episode on all of this stuff that we're talking about here in an in-depth situation that goes for about 45 minutes to an hour. If you guys are invested in, not only technical skills, but your business as well, make sure you head to the website and give yourselves a free business health check, just to give you guys a bit of an idea of where you might be falling short with your business, and give you guys a calibration of where to put your focus, and just so you know exactly what needs to be improved with, not only with your physique and your training, but your business as well. Okay, guys, that's it from me. We will see you guys in the next video. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss out on the next video, and we'll see you in the next one. The next part is understanding muscle shape.